My name is Billy Riggs, and delighted to be here this morning. Um, we've got a little bit of an exciting day today on August 10th, in that there's a hearing that overlaps this that I'll actually be fortunately at regarding some of the level 4 deployments in San Francisco. And so, kind of, since we're here talking about this, I'll kind of introduce. I guess I should say that my co-authors here are Shivani Shukla, um, um, Neil Schrag, and um, Shannon Mark, and you can get a link to our material here. So we have level 4 deployments that are happening in San Francisco, particularly from Cruise and Waymo, and it's important to kind of contextualize this. These are no teleoperation, no fixed route within the ODD on-demand last mile services. I call it an Uber without a driver. And my work, particularly kind of in exploring these fleets, which are, again, kind of using a generalizable software stack that are sensor based with Evergang on board to kind of provide an innovative last mile service, and angling towards kind of shared fleet models using purpose built platforms. For example, the Cruise Origin on the right. And again, I want to anchor to this being like much different than the Uber and Lyft model, and there's an incentive to make trip generation and VMT efficient for these models. But we are at a point where we're seeing kind of these wide scale deployments, and deployments that are actually even looking at other customer delivery features. And this is kind of the interior of Cruise, where they're already starting to kind of experiment with in vehicle features where they can actually improve their margins financially. But because of this phenomenon, my lab has been able to pilot a program called the Research Rider Program, where we've been able to put thousands of students in these vehicles in kind of a first of kind study of rider behavior. And there's been a lot of work that has modeled, for example, speculated about travel behavior in autonomous vehicles, but this is actually a real rider study with real rider behavior. And this is really, how do we get there? I mean, this is really based on Cruise and Waymo's journey from a regulatory process, which has been a 7-year process, looking at driver permits as well as driverless permits. That culminated in late 2021, late 2022, with us putting students in vehicles. This is all regulated by the CPUC, the California Public Utilities Commission. There's a hearing this morning that'll dictate whether or not they can expand their service. In our case, our study really focused on this idea of the dog, and it's a humorous way we describe the shape of the operational design domain in San Francisco when we launched our program with Cruise. Operational domain domains are really have evolved, and they're really a way of defining service these days. In our case, it's not just geography; it's roadway types, speed range, weather conditions, and time of day, and that really allowed us to explore the impacts of AVs on our student population, and particularly during after hours, which were the operational conditions of this ODD, on when potential autonomous vehicles could best serve our students, and how they would serve our students during the nighttime hours when transit is not as familiar. We are a minority serving institution, so primarily riders were were non-white, predominantly female, and most lived out in the city. So 62% with off-campus, 38% with off-campus. So I would like to say, in this case, our students are very representative of the general populace. We anchored kind of by understanding a little bit about their travel habits, and most of these students actually, after hours, during the day, they would travel to school or work, or they do some social events. But after hours, we really had both school and recreational trips, and primarily those were happening, if you look in the center of your screen, after 10 p.m. when transit was less frequent. And this is a very U.S. phenomenon where transit is less frequent. During after hours, they were walking and taking rideshare. driving and taking rideshare. And we look kind of at that graph in the middle. But they still felt, these are students that actually um, norm towards green and sustainable transportation, and want a good distribution as well as connectivity with transit. If you look there on the left, during the day, over 40% used public transit, and we have a quite large bicycle and walking mode share for this population. So, pivot to kind of what we found. And you can see that this is available via download via this QR code, as well as a link in the presentation. Our experiment showed that about 55% of trips replaced rideshare, and so it was not pulling from transit as much as folks thought. I'll show some little data on that later. But interestingly, too, contrary to kind of some of the modeling papers that are out there that have speculated about rampant runaway travel similar to Uber and Lyft, we're really seeing like this being representing existing trips. Only 24% of trips represented new travel. And we should probably throw out that 24% of new trips, we can't really define whether or not that's latent or existing travel that just wasn't being served or induced. So I think that's an opportunity for future work. But it's important because I think we've seen a lot of these complementary services of transit go forward through partnerships with Lyft and Uber, and maybe this is a way to make them more cost effective. Again, we see, if we scratch the surface a little further, we see about between 55 and 56% of riders that would have otherwise used rideshare. And in these riders in AVs, about 22% would have used public transit. But keep in mind, this is in this context, and in many of U.S. cities, public transit is underserving during certain hours, and really can't afford, from a fiscal cliff financial standpoint, to increase services. So important to keep that in mind. In terms of travel, type of travel, a lot of it was social, recreational, and this was actually, but we had more work-related errands than we anticipated. Some of our students really felt like cost was a factor, but when we look back at the factors influencing that travel, a lot of it was related to the same type of factors that we've seen throughout the literature in terms of reliability and convenience that drove the emergence of Uber and Lyft. And, I'd like to say that this kind of really relates back to work by Lisa Real, Robert Severo, and Susan Shaheen in their kind of not just into their taxi paper, where we found very similar things in terms of ease of payment, easy to call a car, fastest way to get there, reliability of service being a factor. We did see a lot of students say, we don't want to drink and drive, and that was actually a big factor as well. Ultimately, we did tons of interviews. Availability of travel, reliability, safety, convenience were what it says. As this student said, the fact that the Cruise vehicles are available when the bus isn't is pretty darn awesome. And we also had many women that were really preferring, as opposed to rideshare, preferring a non-drivered vehicle. So they thought that was a safety improvement over traditional rideshare, irrespective of whether or not they were riding with friends or riding alone. We are seeing one trend that is not showing up this slide is that students are reporting that they feel like the autonomous vehicles, the level 4 autonomous vehicles, are slowing down traffic and improving pedestrian safety in their neighborhoods. So one student, for example, quoted that my street is like a racetrack, and autonomous vehicles really slow down traffic. And as we think about kind of external factors from these vehicles, it could be that we end up with metering traffic a bit more than we anticipated, and actually slowing down speeding vehicles in cities, which is something that folks haven't really dialogued in terms of the external effects of automation, so how they might improve the walking and cycling environment. So lessons and on-policy opportunities. I think we've seen a lot of, we won't dive into this as part of today's, but opportunities and innovations in terms of how the policy testing has been agile, and there's been creativity in defining these operational design domains, and there's an opportunity to innovate in the public transportation space. Particularly, this is an opportunity to limit wasted VMT. We will talk about that, but there's a business incentive that fleet-based AV operators have in reducing wasted miles on the road, and that's an opportunity in terms of thinking about network effect of total transportation. At the end of the day, for cities, there's a lot of infrastructure opportunities and opportunity for increasing sharing, and that's a dialogue that hasn't scratched the surface that much on. So, kind of the TDM crowd really has an opportunity to think about new sustainable business models and services that relate to new forms of shared vehicles from automated vehicles. We should be remiss to talk about there have been reports, and if haven't been seeing these in the news, you've been kind of living in a hole of interactions with emergency responders. They've been quite sensationalized. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that, but these are resolvable issues. The police reports that are all on paper somewhat contradict some of the explanations from automated vehicle companies, but at the end of the day, these are big opportunities. There's a great chance for thinking about anticipatory data, maps, and infrastructure, as well as to think about pickup and drop environment. The kind of when we think about the legality of pickup and drop off, particularly in California, it's illegal, for example, to drop off at a private curb, a private driveway curb cut, and that's perhaps an opportunity because when we look at our curbs. Sometimes there's private curbs that necessarily aren't available even to these companies, and so there's even more limited opportunities for pickup and drop off. And that kind of relates to some of these broader dialogues about kind of how we use our right of way and how we think about our roads and our grids, and ultimately thinking about using our network to think about. And this is Jeff Boeing, and I did a little work on this about if we think about automated vehicles as a part of our network, how do we actually look at shorter trips, fewer blocks traversed, and less VKT. Some of that is how we design our roads and our networks, not exactly how we the vehicles that are operating on them. Ultimately, it's about how we design our roads. This is a lot of what I just talk about in my book, Into the Road, that came out in 2022. And check that out if you have any interest via QR code there. Again, I'm Billy Riggs, or William Riggs. This is about our Research Writer program. I will be attending a fantastic public meeting at 10 a.m., so you'll have to catch up with me via email. But I really appreciate the opportunity to present this work. Thank you.